My name is Claudia Mitchell-Kernan, and I'm Vice Chancellor for Graduate Studies and Dean of the Graduate Division. And for the last 19 years, UCLA's 4 ethnic studies centers have been a part of my administrative portfolio. I've also directed one of the centers, the Afro-American Studies Center, now known as the Bunch Center. So I take a real special pride in both offering this welcome and sharing this opportunity with you to come along with us vicariously on the path we've followed for 4 decades to achieve the distinction we now enjoy. Now, beginning at the beginning, even for those of us who were around from the beginning, it's very, very difficult to achieve a holistic sense of the roads that were taken to lead us to the achievements of today. But we hope this exhibit will help us put that picture together in a fuller way. In establishing academic units to study some of America's marginalized minorities, UCLA was not unique. What happened on this campus was in part a component of a nationwide popular movement. In many places in the country, the specific focus was on African American studies, as African Americans represented a group just emerging from an apartheid system which had oppressed them and their ancestors for more than 300 years. But we developed in a very, very special environment. California, with its multi-ethnic composition, provided a very different environment for the development of ethnic studies than many other places in the country. It is partly for this reason that UCLA was different from many universities across the country, and this is one of the reasons that ethnic studies took some unique directions. Until last year, UCLA was the only university in the country to have 4 academic units focused on, respectively, on Asian Americans, American Indians, African Americans, and Chicano Latinos. In terms of their political and cultural invisibility, these groups recognized that they shared a lot in common and were experiencing in common a cultural and a political awakening. UCLA, with its new chancellor, Charles Young, responded to the challenges of the students by helping them to develop strategic directions for the research and teaching they proposed, and by helping to incorporate them into the academic portfolio of the university. Today, units once seen outside of the mainstream are very much a part of UCLA's research and teaching mission. And as you will see in the course of the exhibit, so well put together by the Fowler Museum, though they were conceived and established in tumultuous times, they have become integral to the research and teaching mission of this institution. Separately, they publish renowned journals and important books. They have archives that attract scholars internationally, and they support a wide range of research from the arts and humanities to the social sciences and public policy. We're also different, I think, in some other ways in maintaining a certain fidelity to an aspect of our mission that was very, very central from the very beginning, and that is attempting to serve our communities and our society while at the same time being researchers and scholars. We wanted to work for change here. And the changes that are reflected in the programs as they exist now and in the exhibit did not occur without struggle. And the images you will see effectively convey the mass movement that helped to push ethnic studies forward. It is well to remember, I think, that the centers were born at the chaotic intersection of political passion and academic and intellectual curiosity. Driven by the rising tide of their demands for social and political equity, people of color wanted equality in academic standing as well. They wanted to learn about their histories and their cultures with the intellectual rigor that matched their passion for social justice. And there was a small but critical mass of faculty and administrators who saw, if only through a glass darkly, that the time for change was upon them. The stories really, plural, of the impact of the ideas of these young people are part of the display that you're going to take a look at, and also their stories are included in our commemorative booklet. What these individuals have accomplished since they led this movement reflects their seriousness of purpose, their intellectual vision, their political acuity, and their great gifts at very, very tender ages. Although he had to send his regrets today, Chancellor Charles Young was very much a part of this story because he understood the meaning of what was occurring here on this campus in the context of broad issues of inequality in our society. It was never particularly one of my career goals to have this long involvement. I sort of imagined myself as an anthropologist that I would spend most of my life outside of this country, working in different parts of the world. I was interested in Polynesia, I was interested in Africa, I did work on American Indians, I did work in Central America and in the Caribbean. Instead, I have spent most of my life here in this country, because as I was coming of age, big changes were taking place, and they pulled me forward to join the movement as it was taking place in the various environments where I was, at Berkeley, at Harvard, and then finally here at UCLA. May I tell you, it has been a wonderful journey, and it has been a journey taken with absolutely extraordinary people, talented, coming from different cultures, who have provided some of the most important experiences, learning experiences of my lifetime. There's no doubt that UCLA UCLA education has helped many people achieve better lives. But our role has been to also help them achieve more enlightened views of the world. It has helped them to better understand the societal costs of inequalities that shape the social formations of which they are a part, from the family to the local to the national and to the global. We hope you will join us in continuing our journey, and as we like to say, a luta continua, the struggle continues, and while the goal has not yet been reached, we have pushed forward a very progressive agenda for a better society and a better world, and we're all very proud of it. Thank you.
That was a wonderful beginning of our full day of activities celebrating the opening of Art, Activism, Access, 40 Years of Ethnic Studies at UCLA. I'm Marla Burns, the director of the Fowler Museum, and I'm very proud of the fact that we are the hosts for this very important exhibition, that Claudia and Belinda Tucker came to me and said, will you host this exhibition looking at 40 years of the history of the 4 primary ethnic studies centers at UCLA? And it struck me as the kind of critical role of a university museum to become the center of discussion and debate and the presentation of that visual record of history. And that's where I think the Fowler will play an important role in this exhibition, not just in the display, but as a place for people to meet and to come together and to have various programs around the exhibition. And I just wanted to say that the Fowler Museum has an interesting parallel history to the histories of the centers. We were founded a little bit earlier in 1963 by then Chancellor Franklin Murphy, who had the same kind of idea of broadening UCLA's focus beyond the horizons of this country to look to the cultures and the artistic expressions of peoples around the world. And we were one of the first museums really to be established with a focus on the arts of Africa, Asia, the Pacific Islands, and the Americas. And we were very much a part of an attempt to to bring the voices of those artists to represent their aesthetic achievements, and to make sure that people understood the very important ways that those arts were a part of daily life and a part of people's social, political, and economic struggles in their own context. So there's a wonderful synergy between what we do and what the centers have done. And I would like to say that I think that this always happens when I speak in the courtyard. It's like something is happening at the hospital. Someone's being taken to the hospital. But we're very pleased to host the exhibition. As Claudia said, that it represents 40 years of activity and progress, but we're also seeing the exhibition as a way to look forward to the next 40 years and the ongoing struggle, because any of us who've been reading the newspaper know that the events across the UC campus mean that we have to redouble our efforts and keep the conversation going, as it's a very distressing thing to have read what's going on. So I would like to again thank Claudia Mitchell-Kernan and Belinda Tucker for having the idea of such an exhibition. We'd like to thank all the directors of the centers and all your staffs and everyone else who's been so generous in locating all the materials that became the substance of the exhibition. I'd like to acknowledge Lisa Itagaki, who was here at UCLA until just a few months ago, who functioned as really the curator of the exhibition and the liaison between the Fowler and all of the centers. And then finally, I'd like to thank the Fowler staff, as always, for doing such a wonderful job of working on this project, and especially to note again the work of Betsy Quick, our Director of Education, and Sebastian Clough, our Director of Exhibitions, because as Claudia intimated, with all those collective years of experience in doing exhibitions, we were able together to find a way to paint a cohesive and coherent and dramatic story, and many individual stories as well as the stories of the centers, to bring this history to life. Because exhibition making is also about stagecraft and presenting something in a way that helps engage people into that narrative. And I think that Sebastian and Betsy have done a wonderful job of bringing those histories alive. And I also want to thank the campus for funding this project so handsomely, the Office of the Chancellor, the Office for Faculty Diversity, the Office of the Vice Chancellor for Graduate Studies, and the Institute of American Cultures have made this exhibition possible. So I'd like to thank you all for being here. I'd like to welcome you to the Fowler. I'm sure you've all been here before. I hope you have, since we're such a central institution on campus. And what we're going to do now is we're going to actually let you see the exhibition and take you in through the doors, but we want you to notice as you go through these doors straight into the exhibition, the wonderful entry wall, which is a kind of graphic summary of the histories by picking out various
Let me say a few words about the organization of the exhibition. This is going to be kind of a rough tour to give because there are so many of you. But we worked very hard on thinking about how to organize the exhibition. And rather than organize it center by center by center, we wanted to look at the importance of the ethnic studies programs over the years. And we ended up focusing on 4 kind of key ideas. One, that this section that we're in is entitled Power to the People. We're looking at certain events that occurred over that 40-year time where students and faculty made a difference. Looking at the hunger strike, looking at tenure issues for Professor Nakanishi, looking at the anti-war movement, looking at Proposition 209, particular events, the sit-in at Alcatraz, where it was clear that there were clear-cut injustices and UCLA faculty and staff could be involved in a meaningful, active way. That's the activism part of the title. The next section, and we'll take a moment after I tell you all four to look at some key points in each of the areas. The next section we entitled Leaving Their Mark. That's part of the art part of this whole story. And that is that as the centers were established in Campbell Hall, murals were painted that really made their mark. The centers made their mark. It was a place called home. And we have wonderfully two of the artists here who painted those murals. And I'll introduce them in a moment with Richard Wyatt, who painted the Bunch Center mural, and Darryl Mar, who painted the Asian American mural. So we'll hear from them a little bit later. The third section of the, and it's not in any sort of 1, 2, 3, 4. You may go in any order you like. The third section is preserving a legacy and looking at the important role that the centers played in building collections, building a history of the underrepresented students and faculty and communities. Again, opening up access for all peoples at the university and in the community. And we have remarkably wonderful archival collections, and the centers chose a few of those to highlight, and we have those featured. And again, some of our staff today, some of the center staff will be talking about those. And then fourthly, this section entitled Conceptualizing New Curricula. Of course, remember in 1969, there were not the academic journals, there were not the books that were really focused on the topics of which this exhibition tells the story. And from publications to films to symposia to conferences, the centers led the way. And we have examples of, we have a wonderful bookshelf in the center featuring some of the perhaps 1,000 to 2,000 publications that have been published over the years, and an extraordinary series of short films and longer films that are on a schedule which is posted. So those will be running continuously. So again, hoping to look at the bigger issues, the bigger stories on why this is such an important 40-year history. Why don't we're right here in the section that deals with events. Any of the center folks who would want to speak up? Chan, did you want to say a little something?
We can say a little bit about the hunger strike here, and we have original flyers as well as photographs. I'll turn over to Carlos Otto, who's our retired assistant director. He 40-some year association with UCLA, and it's so strong that he actually still comes in 2 days a week. So, Carlos, say a little bit about the hunger strike and what that's meant for the center and the university.
Now, I started at UCLA as an undergraduate student in 1965. I came here from Roosevelt High School, and those of you that know East LA know that Roosevelt is right in the middle of Boyle Heights. This occurred in the early 90s, though. So we were fairly far enough along in the development of ethnic studies at UCLA. However, the academic side of the program, the department, had not been developed. There were still too few faculty here at UCLA and insufficient curriculum and instruction developed at the university to sustain a Chicano Studies department. So in 1992, there was an academic review of what was, at that time, an interdisciplinary degree program on Chicano Studies. And the academic review recommended that that program be disestablished, eliminated. So there would no longer be a Chicano Studies curriculum or a coursework leading to a degree. And obviously, this led to a renewed emphasis among the students in the early 1990s. There was also another question, and this had to do with funding. And if you think back to the early 90s, there were similar budgetary issues within the university as we're facing today. There was a budgetary cut from the state to the university, and it was felt at each campus. And in 1992, there was a consideration of eliminating certain aspects of the Ethnic Studies Research Center. At the Chicano Studies Research Center, the possibility of eliminating the library was on the table. So that was another factor for the involvement of students and the involvement of community representatives coming to the university, and ultimately Latino elected officials becoming involved. With all that coalescing, the initial department, the Chavez Institute, was established, and now we have, as of 2005, an actual department for Chicano and Chicana studies at UCLA.
So to wrap up, we should point out that the PhD program in Chicano Studies has been approved and is now underway. And also you'll see over here, not just Chicano or Latino elected officials, you'll see Tom Hayden's signature on the agreement here that brought an end to the hunger strike. So as well as Claudia Mitchell-Kernan, our fearless leader in the Chancellor's office, and then Chancellor Charles Young. So encourage you to take a look at that and other materials here that are part of the primary documents that record that history and over the last 40 years. So Betsy, should we move
Yes,
forward?
Margie, did you want to say anything about the tenure story as a part of this area?
Sure.
Margie Lee?
Darnell has step over to me. You know, I think one of the things that I find very striking about today, and this is at Fowler for the next few months, is that back in the day, the questions among community and students was just what could the university do for the grassroots movement to struggle for social justice? What could scholars and academicians do and benefit the people and the grassroots movement? And I think the T-shirt that stands out, you see it, serve the people, got black students. You've got a number of things that I think, especially in terms of the fight for the whole protest with Angela Davis, the 10-year struggle for Professor Nakanishi. I think it all just gives very good, important documentation that archivists and librarians like ourselves were very involved with mounting this, and that is that the university played a very significant role in partnering with the success of the people's movement, power to the people, struggling for human social justice and rights, as well as the students and faculty, scholars' involvement in this whole movement. And so from here you see from the past and now to the present with our current directors, that we hope to continue this, and that we're very grateful for the Fowler Museum. We're very grateful for Vice Chancellor Mitchell-Kernan, who has made her mark from humble beginnings, and you'll see her earlier metamorphoses and various things here. And she has helped to ensure, advocate, as well as bring forward the agenda for ethnic studies here at UCLA. So we're very grateful that we can be here today to celebrate, recognize, and then as well as also push forward the agenda even after today. So we're very grateful.
Fantastic. And let's move to, I'd love to move to the next section and have a chance for the two artists to speak. It's always a delight to hear from the artist, and especially in this instance. You have come out of this section. One thing that I will urge you to notice before we get to the murals was another device that made possible all the communication among the students. May I ask you all to come a little forward? You have the wonderful opportunity of hearing from two artists. Come all the way a little closer. In addition to artists who were making a difference and creating murals as we see, there was one piece of machinery also that made a difference in communication. And it wasn't Facebook, and it wasn't Twitter, and it wasn't email, but it was the mimeograph machine. And Sebastian, our designer, scouted around and found a mimeograph machine. I will say the second generation, because it was electric. Yes. The one that I remember was the hand crank. Yes. We showed it to a few of our students on campus working in the museum. They had no idea what a mimeograph machine was. It was the mimeograph machine that really connected, made all those flyers getting out into the public, and it was not by email and by Facebook. We have two artists here that are a part of the program, and we're right here. Let me introduce Richard Wyatt. And Richard painted the mural with his a young man, Guillermo Anderson, and they painted it at age 14. And the story is quite interesting. Maybe, Richard, you can share that really briefly with our guests.
Sure. First of all, I'd like to thank UCLA and the Center for so well preserving the piece. I didn't know the piece was still around until the article came out in the Fowler magazine. And I'd like to thank Betsy also, because I had called her and she was real diligent in getting back to me. We missed each other a few times, but we finally did connect. But actually, this piece came about years ago, I would say 1970 or around 69 or so. There was a show at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion that traveled on African American art. And I was too young to attend the reception, but my parents went on my behalf. And so they were standing there talking to this guy about the piece, and this is our son and stuff. And the guy wound up being Franklin Murphy. And so, they says, I wanted you to meet somebody. And so he called over C.Z. Wilson, who was vice chancellor at that time. And C.Z. had seen our work and introduced us to Dr. Art Smith at that time, who was now Maliki Asante at Temple University. And we were commissioned to do this piece. Dr. Art Smith saw our work and gave us total freedom to do it. We were 14, we were both living in Compton. We caught the bus every day. And it was nice for us because it established a couple of things for us. One of which is that you actually could get paid for doing artwork. And I forget what it was, but we were willing to do it for free. It didn't matter to us. And also, during that period that we did paint it, which was over the summer, it really solidified in both of our career goals that we wanted to attend, an academic institution later on in life. And so we painted this piece, and we painted it pretty much every day. And since then, I went to UCLA, and I graduated in '78. And I've been working on gallery shows, museum shows, but there's always been this sort of underlying theme in my work in which I've always wanted to do works that kind of dealt with community and kind of things that I've got involved with. In fact, the current piece that we're doing now with artist May Sun, who was in Hong Kong at the time, and she came out here, we did Union Station together, which is a multifaceted public art statement. And we're currently working on a park that we're doing at the old Ambassador, which is now a school. And we developed this concept, which is finished. We're just waiting to have it installed, but it's based on, pays homage to Robert F. Kennedy. And we've been working with the family, flew us back to Boston to have access to his papers and everything. But it just goes to show you, my parents were here today. You never know. My parents were real supportive of me. So if you have kids, no matter what they're interested in, support them, really support them, because it makes a big difference. I mean, this kid that grew up in Compton, and I'm at the Kennedy Library or whatever, But they also sort of reestablished and really growing up, my parents put me in situations which weren't always African American. They made us appreciate culture outside of that, so which is really kind of important. And I've done a lot of work with Spark. In fact, Armando, we were board members together, Social Public Art Resource Center. And so I've always tried to be involved with projects that deal with that, as well as the gallery works too. So, and I'd like to thank the Fowler once again, and the
Thank you so much.
African American Studies Center for preserving it so long.
I think this is certainly the story that youth programs from the university really make a difference. And it's one of those moments where we tragically see so many of those being disbanded and defunded. So these are wonderful stories in support of that. And Darryl, maybe you could tell us, Darryl Mar is the painter, along with some of his students, of the two works right here. And Darryl, we're so happy that you've joined us this morning.
Thank you, and again, thanks to Fowler for refurbishing the piece, because pieces were broken and whatnot, and they fixed it. That was great. So some 15 years ago, I was a grad student here, and then I've done pieces or murals in the past. So a student group on campus approached me about doing a project for the center. Since all the other ethnic studies programs had murals in place, they wanted something that they could call their own. And I think with this piece that they wanted to present, I guess, the struggle for Asian American, history, and portray that more in an open-ended sort of scenario in terms of where we're not really portraying, the classic icons of railroad workers and farmers and whatnot. So in this sense, it's the attempt was to portray a more of an open-ended read. So, and it's definitely a collaborative project. It probably took I think a quarter, so 12 weeks or maybe 6 months. And the great thing about these projects is that people could just come in and paint for an hour or 2 hours, and so it was truly where it involved a lot of people besides myself. So.
And this piece?
Oh, this piece here was so long ago. I actually forgot. But it was definitely it was a commemoration for Philip Veracruz, and it was done fairly pretty quick. So just me and a friend of mine. There was an event that was happening, so we decided, maybe we'll just do. So we did it in I think 2 days or something.
Fantastic.
So.
Well, we were so pleased when we were able to bring these over from Campbell Hall, do the little bit of restoration that we needed to for the larger mural, and really understood their importance and their inclusion in the exhibition. We bypassed the button blanket from the American Indian Studies Center, which also has been hanging in the corridor of the American Indian Studies Center. And Angela, do you want to say anything about
In particular is that it's a little bit of a mystery. As many of you know, I'm new to the American Indian Studies Center, but I don't think that we've been able to identify the artist or the donor. So if anybody here does know the history of the blanket, we would love to have it. And just on the broader point about this section of the exhibit, I think one thing that, I'm not sure if it's unique to the American Indian Studies Center, but one thing the center has long done for American Indian students is really bridge the cultural gap between Native community life and education, which for many students, especially coming from reservation communities or really rural communities, it can be a very difficult transition to be at a university in a place as large as Los Angeles. We of course have a large urban Indian population too, but we also have a lot of students who come from reservation communities. So the center has really played a vital role in bridging that gap, and you see that as reflected in the powwow posters. This year is the 25th anniversary of the powwow, which we'll be having May 1st and 2nd. You're all invited. It would be great to see you. It'll be here at UCLA. And other things that we have throughout the exhibit, including a jingle dress and other things, show how the cultural life of American Indians has been supported by the American Indian Studies Center, not just the academic life. And it's been a bridge in that sense and very important to our students. So.
Wonderful. Yes.
Regarding the Chicano Studies mural, which is overwhelming and much too large to put into this facility, this is an early sketch of the mural. It was painted by 4 Chicano artists, Ed Carrillo, Saúl Solache, Ramsés Noriega, and Sergio Hernandez. This was completed in 1970 and is considered the first Chicano mural at a university. It's overwhelming. Again, it's too large to put into this facility. It's been in storage since 1991. But we've seen it, several of us have seen it. The 9 large pieces are in perfect condition. And the director of the center has a special secret plan to resurrect the mural.
There's a museum downtown in a park that's considering it for an upcoming show and may keep it on long-term loan. So we're really excited about that. As Carlos said, the mural is too big. I thought, well, I've never heard that argument about the exhibition, but we hope to be able to display it. It is about 22 feet long and about 12 feet tall. So.
And Mexican murals do not do small.
Just a little too small doesn't work in this.
I'd like to point to 2 collections here and emphasize what Paul and Charlotte had said in terms of the role of archiving and filling a void that existed and in many ways still exists within the Academy. We have a collection here, a small sampling of probably one of our most popular collections. It's used on such a regular basis that we keep it at the center in our on-site storage. It's for Pedro Gonzalez, who was a telegraph operator for Pancho Villa, and who came to the United States and essentially established the foundation for Spanish language radio broadcast, which, as you know, is the predominant radio format in the United States at this point. He did this in the 1920s, 1930s, and he also used that as a platform not just for the presentation of culture and music, but to begin protesting against the repatriation or the deportation of Mexican Americans and Mexicans during the Depression, when the government realized it was cheaper to deport a Mexican American than to worry about dealing with the underlying issues being faced by all Americans at that point. And for that, he was framed for rape and he was sent to San Quentin. And that then led to his own efforts to fight on his behalf, but that of the community as well. He was eventually released in 1940 and then deported to Tijuana, where he then set up Tijuana's radio system. And then came back into the US to be with his children, who were all American citizens. What we have here are panels, a few panels. They were actually from the wall of his study. And this is the way he put together his own history, his own archive. And we wanted to respect that and to disassemble it in a way that we could keep track of how he had made sense of his own history. We have his typewriter, and we have one document that he had typed. He remained active throughout his life, lived well into his 90s, and was an activist throughout, both for the rights of Mexican veterans and for the rights of Mexican American citizens and immigrants. So I want to emphasize in closing as well what Paul and Charlotte said about the centers and the collaboration between them. We are now collaborating with the American Indian Studies Center on bringing in a major collection of an organization advocating Native Americans and Latinos in science. And this is part of our ongoing efforts to kind of work with each other, support each other. And I'd just like to end by really giving a shout out and acknowledging we're not just celebrating 40 years of history. We are making the next 40 years of history, and as part of that, we have two new directors. We have Angela Riley at the American Indian Studies Center, and David Yu at the Asian American Studies Center, and just like to acknowledge them joining us.
Yes, absolutely, Darnell.
Hi everyone, I'm Darnell Hume. I'm director of the Ralph J. Bunn Center for African American Studies, and I'm proud to say I've been here as director since 2001. My, how the years fly. Okay. I'm also a graduate of UCLA. I did my PhD here in 1994, and while I was here, something very important took place, and that was the 1992 LA uprisings. And one of the collections we have here on the walls, these 11 photographs here, are part of a much larger collection of photographs that became a part of this book, Life in the Day of Black LA. And in some of the photographs, if you look closely, you'll see images of the aftermath of 1992, because the book was published in 1992, and the black photographers of Southern California, led by the late Roland Charles, went about with the idea of, in a short period of time, chronicling black life in Los Angeles through photography. So when we think of preserving a legacy, of course, photographic records become absolutely critical. And a number of artists, art historians, consider the black photographers of Southern California as being a key group in establishing them on display. But at your leisure, I encourage you to look into the book here, Life in the Day of Black LA, where you can see many of the photographs, not just the ones on the wall. In fact, one of the photographs in the collection that you'll see in the book is called Waiting for the Other Shoe to Drop, which was photographed, my band is a little bit too small here, was photographed by Roland Charles, and it became the cover art for a book I wrote that was published in 1997 called Screening the Los Angeles Riots, Race, Seeing, and Resistance, which was an attempt to look at how mass media explored the events and the way people made sense of them sitting at home in their living rooms. The last point I'd like to make as it relates to this particular exhibit is that it also finds its way into a new 8-year project that the Bunn Center is just wrapping up called the Black Los Angeles Project. In fact, we have a 16-chapter volume called Black Los Angeles, American Dreams or Racial Realities, forthcoming from NYU Press, that has a chapter on black art in LA that features this exhibit. So again, at your leisure, I encourage you to take a close look at the photos and also peruse the publication. Thank you.
Margie, are you going to talk about the Yuri Kochiyama collection, I believe?
Yeah, I'd like to let our you, with also historian, speak a little bit first on the significance of archives here at UCLA.
I know the papers of Yuri Kochiyama, who was an activist for many years in New York City, and was involved with people like Malcolm X. And if the photo here in the Life magazine, you'll see her crediting his head when he was assassinated. But Yuri Kochiyama was actually from Southern California and grew up in Terminal Island, which is off near San Pedro. Grew up in a Japanese American community there. And then during the war, that island was evacuated for the camps. But her papers are at the center, and I think that's one of the great things about the Ethnic Studies Center is that we have these amazing archives that really document and chronicle our respective histories. And for me as a historian, I've used the archives here quite a bit. For example, in special collections, and there's still so much more to process. But it's important, I think, for us to be able to not only document our history, but to have a safe space for them so that they can continue to be accessed. Because as we all know, working in community-based organizations, so many of those organizations lose their papers. I can't tell you how many times I've been doing work where I've gone to organizations and they don't know where the papers went. I was up in San Francisco one time at an organization where they decided to put the papers outside in these metal bins in San Francisco, as you can imagine. So by the time I got to the papers, most of them were crumbling. And so it's great that we have something like this to preserve. So I don't know if, Margie, you want to say anything else about the papers?
Just as a footnote, I think, this year Yuri Kochiyama is 88. So of course in her prime, she was considered quite a progressive in the 30s and a communist, of course. And so they had what they called the Nisei, sort of a Nisei radical contingent on the East Coast. But, born and bred in Southern California, and then raised her family in Harlem, New York. And she had no inclination to become this. Her sort of politicization just sort of grew as her kids grew and became involved with some sort of a PTA in Harlem, and then got involved with other issues. And of course in New York, how can you not be involved with issues of the community? So even things like lapel buttons and pins just sort of illustrates the vast breadth of her concerns and her interests, whether or not it was African American concerns, the Caribbean, the Puerto Rican independence, the political prisoners in the industrial complex, all sorts of things. And when we first we first asked her, and she said, "Why would some place like UCLA be interested in my stuff?" And of course it documents not just the role of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the movement in the community, but actually the intersection of the people of color within the East Coast and the bridging in the West Coast. So we're very, very fortunate to be processing her collection and hope to be finishing soon so that students and community will be able to come to UCLA. So it's a pitch for all of you who have things in your garages. Please don't underestimate their significance and value, their voice, and we hope that you'll find a good home for them.
I will have to say, as a museum professional, that working with the centers